Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Support, the podcast where we talk about your burning questions with an expert. We've got with us an expert here, Ryan from Forecast Consoles. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm good. I don't get called an expert a lot. It's nice.
Well, you've now graduated to expert. We only bring on experts, and if you didn't know you were one, the invite to come on this show is how you know.
Okay, well then I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the questions that have come in related to an area that I know that you're really familiar with, which is the furnishings, that aspect of studio setups. So we're here at the AVIXA TV studio, which Forecast Consoles has also helped with some of the wonderful furniture that's here as well. And so we want to talk to you about the questions that some of our audience has about this concept and how it relates to the productions that they might have in their different spaces. So we'll get right into it if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So the first question that we've got, this is actually one of my favorite questions, is are there different things a person needs to think about if they are setting up at home versus in a corporate space? What would be the difference there?
Obviously, there's going to be differences just for a lot of reasons, but I think there's a lot of differences between spaces in general. And I think the one commonality is to figure out what is the purpose of that space. And what is going to make whoever's working in that space feel most comfortable. So if it's in your house, right, you may choose, for example, if you have a smaller house where you don't have a dedicated office space and maybe your production environment is going to also share your dining room or living room, right? There's going to be certain choices you make that will be more conducive to when you have friends come over. There is not, production gear everywhere. Whereas if you're in a permanent installation in a larger studio, you have more flexibility to kind of do things that are more aesthetically more corporate than, say, your home house and your own personal aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that I think, I think the reality is obviously every room is different sizes. Every use case is slightly different. But at the end of the day, I think that the decision comes down to what is going to make the people that are in there feel comfortable and focus on that. Yeah.
So we got to talk a little bit before we started recording now, and I remember you brought up something about the different people that have to use the space. And so I'm thinking one of those differences might be in a corporate space, you've got not just yourself and maybe someone coming in, but you may have yourself as an engineer. A lot of our audience would be audio engineers, but you've also maybe got those folks who have to come in and maintain the system too, right? You talked about...
So it's sort of like you have really the two groups of people that use the space. You have the operators that are going to sit at the desk and work with all the gear and put on the production, but then the people that need to service it, right? So we put a lot of emphasis into cable management. And the reason is that, you talk about comfort level in a space, and I think that can be driven by aesthetics, material choices, size, shape, ergonomics, etc. And I think sometimes, depending on the specific environment, you may have, say, for example, a certain color because that's the corporate color. Mm-hmm. And even though that might not be the person working at their's favorite color, there's not a lot of options there. It's the corporate color. So there are going to be things that are requirements of a space that we can't control or can't cater to the operator's taste. But the one thing we can do is ensure cleanliness, right? Mm-hmm. So cable management and hiding gear as much as possible to create sort of this clean environment, clutter-free, as you would say. And then at the same time, for the people that are servicing the equipment, make it as easy as possible for them to access things, right? So that they're not having to climb underneath the desk or work on their back or kind of try and figure out how to get their tiny little hands into something, right? So I think that comfort level extends to both the operators and the engineers working on it. So yeah.
That's cleanliness is huge. That makes a lot of sense. I'm a musician and I have a home studio set up, but there's times when I tell myself, man, I kind of want to be lazy for a moment and just shove the cables under the rug a little bit. But I also know, for reasons that we'll probably get to in some of these other questions, and you'll probably be able to say why that's not really a good idea.
Oh, no, it's a great idea. No, seriously. Sure. So legitimately, one of our product lines actually just has its metal chassis underneath the desk.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it's got just hinged front and rear doors. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind that came from the fact that Right, so day one, the first time you set up the system, it's going to be beautiful because you can spend all of the time cable managing and Velcroing and training all of your cables, and it's immaculate. And the first time something goes wrong and you need to patch a cable in or swap something out, all of that is coming undone instantly, and you got to go live, or you need to get a project out, or for whatever reason you have to go. I think you want the ability to, I say, shut the door and forget the mess. I do think it's healthy to every once in a while go back and reevaluate that cable management and clean things up,
Sure.
But it's the idea that like nobody knows it's there but me, and that's in the back of my mind. Like there's some logic to that, but I think at the end of the day, like sometimes we just need to fix a thing, and by being able to kind of shut that door and forget the mess, that's part of cable management, right?
Yeah.
Being able to make changes on the fly, have it look like a rat's nest, but not let anyone see it, I think actually is a positive.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing in the corporate space. You probably have people that are coming to see it as well. So being able to think about that makes sense.
And those people coming to see it will definitely have a dongle or a laptop that's not compatible with whatever is in there currently. And you're going to have to change it on the fly, or any number of reasons that, you're going to panic and it needs to happen, and you do it, and you just want to be able to, everything here is fine. Nothing to see. No one knows anything ever happened.
Dongle chaos. I'm sure that there are people watching at home who will be saying in the comments, amen. Preach it, brother. No. But this next question, I know I actually have a perspective on this. I'd love to hear yours. This is related to aesthetics.
Okay.
It's a simple question. If my studio looks better, will I sound better?
I'm sorry? No.
Yeah.
It's tough, right? Like I don't want to, I don't, we were talking a little bit earlier, we were talking about kind of like, what is our product for? Like how much home studio do we really do? And the reality is that just due to the cost of putting in true production furniture, I genuinely believe, and it's funny, like I sell this stuff for a living, but I'm going to tell you to please don't buy this, right? Like invest in your cameras, your lighting, your microphones. There's so many technology things you can invest in to make your product or your production better before you purchase production furniture, right? So I'm not going to lie to you and say it's going to make you sound better. Upgrading to a better microphone is going to make you sound better. But at the same time, I do think there is, at a certain point, when you've reached a level of either financial success or have the opportunity to be able to, so you've invested in the technology you need to be at the peak of what you're doing. I think there is, whether it's true production furniture, like something we sell, or whether it's just a very nice desk from wherever, right? I think your environment can have a positive impact on your creative process. I think people look at like having art on walls that inspires them, choosing paint colors that inspire them, sound better, invest in some good sound panelings, wall treatments, acoustics, things of that nature. I think there is a lot of that goes into creating a space from a technical standpoint, but then from an aesthetic standpoint, I think it really comes down to what makes you happy, what brings you joy, right? So in my personal office, there's a ton of sci-fi art on the walls, and then on one wall is all like weird science fiction art, right?
Yeah.
And the other wall is birds, paintings of birds. I don't, in separate conversation, but the point is whatever sparks joy for you is what you should surround yourself with.
Yeah, I really love that. I said I'm a musician and I have a studio set up at my house. There are things that I have on the walls that I know are reflective surfaces, but they make me feel better. And I actually like the look of them. And so for me, when I think about performance capture, which is what a studio is doing, like even this studio, we've got a wonderful crew here who's capturing our performance as people speaking to each other. If I feel better, I don't sound better, but I have a better experience. And I think because I'm feeling a little bit better, getting to good takes less time.
Well, you said it. It's a comfort level, making people feel comfortable. And if you're comfortable in your space, you're going to feel... Yeah, but I love that idea of joy, thinking about joy. We talk about technology a lot, and it's nuts and bolts and, electrical this and currents and waves going places. All of these things that sound to the layperson like either sci-fi or boring, but these things are things that are part of the equation, but the way you feel definitely is that too. So speaking of feel, I know how you feel about this question. I don't even know if this is a hot take or not, so you may be able to just kind of go off here, but
This question is about the perfect studio setup, and it simply says, describe the perfect studio setup.
The one that technologically meets your needs and makes you happy.
Okay.
That's it. It's so individual. It's so specific. Like I said, for me, there's certain types of art, there's certain colors, there's certain things like that. Obviously, not being it personally in production, it's, computer, monitors, keyboard, mouse, right?
Yeah.
But I think for a production environment, you have your equipment and gear that you're going to be using day in and day out. And I think that once you sort of solve for what technology you need in the space, then you kind of are freed up to think about, how am I going to interact with this technology? Where am I going to place it? Where do I place different operators? Sight lines, that's huge, right? So there is no such thing as a perfect studio because every setup is going to be different, right? People use different media, different technology. They have a different output, right? Some is we're going to record and that's it. Some is going to stream. Some is live for broadcast. So you're live on TV. So everything is different, but the common through thread would be first solve the technology problem, right? Do we have all the technology we need to accomplish whatever production we're doing? And then thinking about how do we make it so that the space, either if it's a home studio for ourselves, how do we make ourselves happy? And then if it's a more corporate environment or a broadcast environment or live, whatever it is, the operators can, if not their favorite color or, how do you make it look clean and feel good for them in their daily work?
Yeah. So if I wanted to go full on purple, I can go full on purple.
Absolutely.
And I would go, man, it's not the perfect studio setup. It's perfect for me. Maybe no. But we're always evolving too, right? So that setup's probably going to have to change. The needs are probably going to have to change over time as you bring in more clients, bigger projects. So whatever you have, I would say maybe we don't need to get too attached to the things that we have today because we may need something new in the future.
So that's a phenomenal point, and we actually hadn't talked about this. So one of our big driving forces is modularity. One of the things that we try and focus on is the ability to change on the fly, right? So that's having rack boxes and turrets and accessories that you can swap around so that you don't have to throw out your production studio every couple of years when you want to change something out. Pre-planning for one of the biggest pieces of equipment that we build around is production switchers. And obviously that's something that probably is going to change more frequently than your studio, right?
Sure.
So we frequently will work with clients to create temporary inserts, right? So there's actually a big insert that's removable, and that in the future when they get different switchers, that insert comes out and then a new insert can go in to support different production switchers. Obviously there's, within reason, right? If you're going from a small 1ME to a 4ME, production board, 4 feet, a meter wide by whatever. So I think there are some limitations to that, but I do think as much as possible, we try and create products that have longevity in the sense that they can not only be modular in themselves, but are made up of reusable components where we can take an entire room and maybe reconfigure everything, right? So maybe you had an L-shaped control room and now you want to move to a more traditional 2-row control room, or vice versa. Having the ability to do that with minimal waste, it for me personally is important. So from an environmental standpoint, but that's just me. But the business case is from a monetary standpoint, it's a lot easier to sell it to your whoever is writing the check for it when you're like, oh, it's only going to cost us this much to rearrange this room rather than throw it all out and start over. So yeah,
I'm a big fan of modularity if we can reuse. But the thing that I know can be challenging is not necessarily knowing how long you can keep a thing, but being able to think about that even when it comes to the way you're furnishing your space and not just the equipment that you're using. I think that can make a world of difference. Again, like that sort of adage I have is getting to good should take less time. And if you don't have to spend all of your time doing the things that aren't bringing you joy and may also not be bringing you profit, that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So, we've got 2 more questions, actually. One of these is, kind of related to aesthetics. It sounds like it's about trendiness. So I'm going to lean on you for this 100%. I'm not a very trendy person. My entire outfit was picked out by my wife. So if you think that I look stylish and profiling, that's because I have an awesome wife.
She has
shout out to her.
I am a big fan of the purple, by the way.
Yes. I love purple now because apparently it looks good on me, as my wife has said.
It does.
Anyway, she's at home blushing because I mentioned her, which is fine. But I'm going to ask you about aesthetics because it's more something in your wheelhouse. This person says, I want a really trendy studio for clients. What tips would you have for that wow factor today?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the first thing to do would be to, I don't want to say Google it, but like, I think you should look at what other people are doing. I think I'll give a perfect example, right? So I make furniture for a living. We do this production furniture for a living, designing and it's amazing where you can gain inspiration from. So my wife, who also is the aesthetics person in our house, was a huge fan of mid-century modern furniture, so like Danish modern stuff. And I've always enjoyed that kind of teak wood aesthetic and functionality. And it doesn't translate super well into production furniture, but I definitely I'm always looking for the opportunity to kind of like integrate that. Haven't found it yet, but I'm going to eventually. But I think finding inspiration from being willing to find inspiration outside of your specific either industry or even region. And a great example for that is, so we've been building broadcast studios in the US for years. At IBC this year, I had an opportunity to tour a number of production trucks, European-style production trucks, and seeing the way that they were built and the furnishings that were used there was tremendously inspiring to me.
Sure.
And have actually influenced a lot of the R&D decisions coming back from IBC in September. I kind of got with my design team like, so here's some photos of things and we're going to do all this blah, 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 blah. Because I saw all these like different material choices, different designs. And I'm like, I love all of this. Let's do some of this. Like, let's bring this, incorporate this into our designs. So to get back to the original question, to design something trendy, I think the trick is to find out who's doing cool stuff. And go, I want to do that. A friend of mine does radio, right? And he went to Australia because apparently radio is apparently a big thing in Australia that there's a lot of investment in.
Okay.
And was taking photographs of different radio studios in Australia and sent them all over to us. And I looked at it, I was like, oh, that's super cool. And one of the commonalities was LED integration. That's actually something we do a ton of. It started out for us as a cool trade show thing, right? Just get people to come into the booth, like almost like the flashing sign, like grab people's attention, right? But at the end of the day, it's become a super functional tool, and we could go down the rabbit hole of talking about that for forever. We're currently working with technology partners to integrate tally, functionality, status indicator lights, and full control of the LEDs in our desks, just so you can make it part of your light show or make it a functional tool. But again, that all kind of came together from this cool aesthetic thing we wanted to do. And then seeing the photographs of those studios, I'm like, yeah, I can absolutely do that because we're already using these LEDs. They use a lot more white, which for us was, you don't use white in a broadcast control room.
Yeah.
Also, please don't use white in a broadcast control room. And if you do, make sure that it is below the countertop, because glare is an interesting thing.
Yes.
But again, I think it's, the idea is to, one, look around and see what else is out there and do I like that from that, that from that, that from that. Two, that I would take don't be limited to just your industry. Be willing to take inspiration from things that are completely outside of what you do. And three, leverage the resources that are available. So myself and the other production furniture manufacturers, most of us offer either free or low-cost design services where we can actually work with you to help select materials, designs, styles. And I think that can be a really great resource as well.
Yeah, that's an awesome tip. letting the pros, talk about delegating, letting the pros come and actually give you some advice, because I don't know if every other tech nerd out there is like me, and it's like, yeah, every day I could just walk out and say, well, I'm wearing like my flannel or my checkerboard shirt and some jeans, and like, yeah, that's style, and just have something that looks somewhat clean and say, no, that's style. My wife might say, like, are you packing well for your trip? It's like, yeah, I got shirts. But if everyone else is like me, you might need a little bit of help on the trendy side with the fashion. So knowing that there's pros out there who will come and talk with you and help you figure that part of your business out is actually really great.
And I want to caveat that, though, and this is important, is that they may be, quote, pros, but it's not their home, right? Yeah. It's not their studio, and they may have opinion. Heck, I have opinions. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that they're right for you. I mean, I always approach it as a collaboration. Like, I will share best practices and recommendations, but at the end of the day, it's your space. Mm-hmm. So if something is going to make you comfortable that maybe isn't my personal aesthetic, that's okay. But if there are certain things that you may want to do, for example, a white granite countertop. I had a customer who wanted to put that in, and my recommendation to them was, you do live sports production in a dark control room with a lot of very shiny screens, or very bright screens, and you're going to have a shiny gloss white work surface. Yeah. You're going to hate this. It was their decision to make. That's the decision they made. And I very quickly replaced those countertops to something that was not shiny white granite, because their operators did not enjoy working in that environment. But I think it's okay, because it's your space, right? What makes you happy is the goal. That granite marble made one person happy, and unfortunately made a team of 20 people miserable. And so, they were gracious enough to admit that maybe this wasn't our best plan and made a change. So, yeah.
So think of these folks as consultants.
Yes.
Consultants, they're collaborators. Ultimately, yeah, you've got to live with it. You've got to be happy.
Yeah.
Sure. So speaking of that, you kind of just mentioned things that might be a little bit of an error. We've got one final question here where this may end up being a bit of a hot take, but it simply says, what are top mistakes that you see in studio setups? How much stress is this?
How much time do you have? No, I think there's so many, but I would say that the biggest one that I see is simply not thinking about it at the onset. And it's probably the most common one too. What will happen is, and obviously this is specific to new builds or retrofits, where, an architect or designer will come in and lay out a space. And that person may or may not be experienced in broadcast production or studio production, right? They may be more of a general architect.
Yeah.
And so they're giving you a room size that may actually not be conducive to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And we see frequently, they'll put a CAD stamp in there of a desk placeholder, and that desk is 24 inches deep. Which is 600 millimeters, give or take, which is not what an actual production desk is, right? Just due to the depth of equipment, it doesn't work. And so everyone, from a overall management standpoint, signs off on those drawings, and they're just like, oh, this is great, done. And then it gets to the actual people that need to build the room, and they're looking at it going, oh my God, this is not enough room. So I would say is if you're in the decision-making stage for those people, involve them as much as possible. Again, involve the companies that build studios. There are a ton of consultants that design studios. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish, it might be reasonable to bring on an architect that specializes in studio design, or a consultant that specializes in studio design. If it's not that large of a project, you can reach out to people that build production furniture. Ask your integration partners. Many integration partners have furniture manufacturers they already work with and have a great relationship, and can go to them and go, hey, we've built a similar type room before. Here were the dimensions. Here was the sizes. This is how it looks. Boom. there's so many resources out there. Take advantage of those. So that's the mistake number one, is not thinking about your studio space, the production furniture specifically, and how it all ties together at the appropriate time. I would say the next mistake is thinking that it has to be perfect day one.
Yeah.
Right? To your point of things are going to change, and that's okay. And I think being open to that change frees up the mental space to go into it being like, it's okay, we tried this, it didn't work, that's okay, we can try something else. But I would just caveat that with, make sure that the production furniture you're using or the space you're designing has the thought of that flexibility built in. So that way, when you do run into the time where I'm like, oh, yep, that ain't working, let's change that, you have the ability to do that with like minimal, investment or, decommissioning. So yeah. Other mistakes. White countertops, shiny countertops, just no shiny countertops.
I was going to say, you've been doing this so long, I'm sure you've seen too many to count or to remember, but...
I would honestly, I think they all, there's lots of little ones, specific ones, but I think they all boil down to two things. The lack of planning and preparation, and then putting the thought into it before you build the physical room and buy all the gear, and right? And the other one is an inflexibility or a fear of change. So you try and shoehorn in solutions, or like you force yourself to use something that isn't right, and you just end up hating it, and it just grows more and more frustrating every time. You're like, oh, this isn't working, and then you eventually change it anyway. So just be open to the fact that design one might not be the final design, and that's okay. But that again goes back to why do iteration in the design process. Start early in the design process. Try lots of different stuff. And there's plenty of partners out there that'll be with you through that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. So kind of maybe in closing, I'd say that I feel like there's like two kind of takeaways from this episode. That planning is so important. There's an old quote that it makes me think of that failure to prepare is to prepare to fail. Think about those scenarios, and those that are in tech, we try to think of contingencies and think of things that might need to change. Be aware of that, but also like chill for a second and recognize everything's not going to be perfect. So I know.
Well, we said this earlier, the whole, like, be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Recognize that we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Be willing to roll with it.
Yeah. Roll with it. That is awesome wisdom. I think we'll close out on that wisdom. I think you might be, I don't know, are you a Star Wars fan?
I am quite a Star Wars.
You're wrong on this, but I feel like Yoda might have said something like, okay to not be perfect it is, or something like that. I don't know, but we'll say that he did. But I want to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of Tech Support. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on. And you can definitely check out Forecast Consoles if you have any other questions about your specific design setups, anything that you want to ask questions about, things you want to tweak and make more perfect, maybe a little bit more. But in the end, don't freak out too much. Have fun and have some joy with your setup. So I've been Leon. This is Ryan. Again, thanks so much for joining us here on Tech Support.
Thank you.